Welcome everyone to this week's lesson overview for Sunday, May the 8th. Thanks so much for joining me here. Let's go ahead and get right to our text, which is 1 Corinthians 5, 1 through 8. We're continuing our series in Corinthians, dealing with problems in the church. This week, Paul is addressing sexual immorality in the church and the need for discipline. Now, as far as context goes for this passage, it's pretty straightforward. Paul is addressing several issues in the church, back to back to back, so the passage is really focused in on the issue at hand. There's not a lot of extra stuff that you would have to look at outside this particular passage to fully understand what Paul is trying to get at. So let's look at our biblical truth for this week. In an effort towards redemption, that's the key, the church must discipline those who dishonor Christ and who dismantle the purity of the church with their sin. That is the big thing we're trying to get across this week. It's a very touchy issue, I know, but it is a solid biblical teaching and a solid biblical truth that we're trying to get across here. Let's look at our learning goals. First, we want our learners to know that we need to examine the importance of accountability because of the determinant of sin in the body of Christ. We all want them to do is to evaluate the role of accountability in their relationship with God and the church. So let's take a look at two issues in the Corinthian church as it pertains to our passage here in chapter 5. The first is sin, which is sexual immorality. Paul goes into detail about specifically what that is, but the other thing that is also a sin in this passage is the tolerance of the church at Corinth. And they are proudly boasting in their acceptance of this one individual who is living in sexual sin. Now we see this today, don't we, in other denominations that have embraced homosexuality. They feel that their level of tolerance is a form of grace and goodness to these people, and they're accepting of this particular form of sexual immorality. And here we see this is not a new problem. This existed in the first century church here in Corinth, and the issue of discipline had to be brought up by Paul. So before we get into the issue of discipline, let's talk about first what church discipline is not. A lot of misconceptions out there. It is not weeding out those who disagree with or those we disapprove of. This is not just those we disagree with because of sin. Obviously, we should disagree with and disapprove of sin. This is those we disagree with because they don't make money like we make money, or they don't dress like we dress, or they've got tattoos, or they live in a different part of town than we did. They have a different ethnicity than we do, or they have a different lifestyle than we do. This is not a chance to weed out people in the church that don't particularly are like us. It is not the sole role of one person or a group. Church discipline is not some sort of hitman activity for a particular staff person or for a particular group in the body of Christ, such as a committee or the deacon body, to go out there and sort of pick off those people in the church. It is a responsibility of the church as a whole. It is not a means to maintain the power structure. It is not something for those who are in control and in power in the church to maintain the status quo and to get rid of those that threaten that. Church discipline is not punishment. That is not the purpose of church discipline, is to punish people. Like we said before in the biblical truth, the goal is redemption, not punishment. And likewise, it is not the absence of grace. We live in a society today that is big on everything has to be grace, 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 acceptance, acceptance, acceptance. And some people see church discipline as just being mean-spirited and focusing in on punishment, and there's no grace involved. In fact, it's just the opposite. When church discipline is done correctly, grace abounds. So why church discipline? Why are we looking at this? Why should we even focus in on this in our lessons? Number one is to maintain purity and unity in the body of Christ. That is essential. That's why we're looking for this issue of redemption when we talk about church discipline. It is important to look at church discipline because it is important to drive home the point that sin is serious and the gospel is key. Too often we in churches tend to look the other way in regards to sin. The point is made in the lesson that sometimes in churches we as Christians have forgotten how to blush. Sin so pervades and is saturated in our society and even in our churches that we're not shocked by sin. And we look at this passage from 1 Corinthians 5, Paul is just passionate about what he's saying. He is shocked that this is going on, not just at the sin, but the level of tolerance that's going on. And so we need to be able to do church discipline in order to drive home that point that sin is serious and the gospel is the key. And we've got to protect the integrity of the gospel, specifically Christ's finished work on the cross. When we tolerate sin, when we turn a blind eye to that, and we let it just sort of saturate into the congregation and spread throughout, then we are basically doing a horrible injustice to Christ's work on the cross. Christ's work on the cross is all about sin and how horrible it is, and how horrible it is in our own lives, and how it incurs God's wrath. And when we make little of sin, we are basically dragging the cross of Christ through the mud. And we need to uphold the cross of Christ and his finished work on the cross, and what that means in the gospel, in our lives, as we work towards redemption. Because when it comes to church discipline, we need a gospel perspective, not a worldly one, and we need to avoid the idea that church discipline is a bad thing. We should not do that because we want to, keep everything nice and pleasant and not overturn the apple cart and cause disruption in the church. When in fact it is sin that causes the disruption, and it is sin in the church that causes disunity. Church discipline is there to correct that, to apply the gospel to the situation, and see redemption. So let's look at some teaching tips for you guys for this Sunday. Be prepared for questions and challenges. This is a difficult but biblical teaching. So don't shy away from questions that may come in, and even challenges. Again, if you've got things that come up on Sunday morning that you're just not sure what to do with, don't hesitate to email me, and we'll get an answer for you so you can address that in the following Sundays. Don't forget the teachings of Jesus in Matthew 18, 15 through 19. This is one of your support passages for this week. And Jesus details step by step by step how church discipline is supposed to take place. And it's important because this is not just something someone can say, well, this is just an interpretation, this is just an added on later process. These are the very teachings of Jesus Christ himself. Remember to emphasize redemption as the goal of church discipline. Help your class see the gospel in the process. That's an important thing for us to do, because that is ultimately what we're trying to get across with people, is that the gospel is the thing that we're trying to do and see happen in the life of a believer when it comes to church discipline, and redemption is the ultimate goal. So guys, I am praying for you as you prepare for this Sunday. I know it's going to be a difficult topic to teach on. Many of your people in your class have probably never seen church discipline actually take place. And so that's going to make it all the more difficult to get this across to them. But the good thing is the Bible is very clear about what church discipline is. And again, if you've got questions, don't hesitate to let me know by email, Facebook, or just give me a call. Again, I'm praying for you, and God willing, I look forward to seeing you this Sunday. Thanks so much.